Hello and welcome back to our series on Bach's Orgelbüchlein. And today we're going to look at just one aspect of playing, and that's ornamentation. And in connection with that, we're looking at one prelude, which is Wenn in höchsten, Nöten, sein, which is one of the miscellaneous chorales at the back of the collection. So just very quickly, before we turn to the ornaments themselves, this particular hymn on which the chorale prelude is based is concerned with when we're at our greatest need, when we don't know where to turn for help and advice. That is when we turn to God for salvation and for help. So like many of the other hymns, it's not a sad message, it's one of comfort, one of support, one of help. The chorale prelude itself is a simple texture. There's a left hand and pedals which move largely in quavers in a figuration which is here and there derived from the hymn tune itself. But the bulk of what we're looking at today, at least, is the right hand, which is the chorale melody, which is richly ornamented and decorated. It's obvious from the beginning that the tempo is going to be slow. The harmonic rhythm moves in quavers, so 2 distinct harmonies per beat of the chorale. But even more than that, the decorated chorale moves in very short notes, demi-semiquavers often, and that means that the tempo is going to be even slower than the harmonic rhythm might otherwise suggest. But at the same time, it doesn't want to get so slow that it loses connectivity, that it becomes disjointed. So there's a balance to get somewhere between the two. But what we're going to be looking for is something which sounds improvisational, it sounds free, unforced. So it shouldn't sound shuttered in by all these notes and ornaments. So what we're going to be looking for is an outpouring of notes. It sounds something which sounds improvisational. It shouldn't sound forced or stilted. And that actually is a really good definition of ornaments in general. Before we look at the ornaments individually, we can ask what ornaments are actually for. And they're for a multitude of different things. The first one is quite obviously that if on an organ or a harpsichord you want to emphasize a particular note, we would do that sometimes through articulation, through the way in which we release the previous note or the previous 2 notes. But another way is an ornament. It draws attention to a significant note, to the climax perhaps of a phrase, or to some other note that you particularly want to highlight. So that's one good reason for having an ornament. Another is to signalize some structural event. So for example, a trill immediately before a cadence. It waves its hand at you and says, look, listen out, here is something important about to happen. Pay attention. Yet another reason is in a slow-moving passage. If you have very long, slow notes, ornaments can help to propel the music along, to give it a sense of flow, to stop it from sounding static. So ornaments can add momentum or add movement to a slow melodic line. And finally, when you're repeating a passage, there is a convention that you shouldn't play a repeat in exactly the same way that you played it the first time, and so ornaments are often applied then for the sake of variety. You sometimes see definitions of ornaments as, for example, a short melodic formula, and nothing actually could be further from the truth. An ornament shouldn't be a formula, and nor should it be melodic. An ornament doesn't alter the melody, it doesn't get in the way of the melody, it doesn't obscure the melody. An ornament should enhance and point out the melody. It shouldn't be a formula because it shouldn't be something which sounds like it's been added in. It should be a part of the melodic line, a natural part of the flow. But we really have quite a big problem talking about ornaments in general, or at least specific ornaments. You know, in quantum mechanics, which is a subject a little bit diverse from organ playing, in quantum mechanics there's something called wave function collapse. which means essentially that if you have a very complex quantum state in which many things can be happening, contradictory things sometimes all at the same time, as soon as you actually stop and look at it, it kind of becomes all self-conscious and curls up and becomes one-dimensional and just does one thing at a time. And ornaments are a little bit like that. If you write out, for example, a trill like this, then it stops being a trill. It just becomes two notes wiggling backwards and forwards, a bit like an ambulance siren, but less useful. So essentially, when you write out an ornament, it stops being an ornament. You know, again, you find sometimes sentences like, in order to be helpful, the editor has written out all the ornaments so that you'll know how they should be played. And that's a complete contradiction in terms, because if you write out the ornaments, you don't know how they're going to be played. You have frozen the ornaments and killed the function that they're trying to play. An ornament, by definition, can't be written out, otherwise it ceases to be an ornament. So ornaments are all about freedom, improvisation, spontaneity. And once you freeze them, they become rigid, they become useless for their purpose. Now, of course, we do need to know what the various signs mean in general terms. And for this purpose, we can look at the Explikation, which is Bach's table of ornaments in the Orgelbüchlein, the little keyboard book which he wrote for his son. This term, Büchlein, by the way, seems to be associated in Bach's mind with something that is a teaching resource. But do remember that these and similar ornament tables are not a prescription that you should play exactly these notes, let alone in exactly that rhythm. At the very most, they're just telling us the shape of what you're doing. They function a bit like a road sign. So the first ornament that we encounter in bar 1 is a mordant with a rising prefix, what Bach calls an accent and mordant. You'll notice, by the way, that on paper, at least, the mordant is placed on the beat, but the accent is placed before the beat. And there's some discussion about whether a compound ornament like that begins on the beat or anticipates it. Actually, if we put it briefly, there are two schools of thought about ornaments in general. So one school of thought, which you'll find in very many of the manuals in 18th century performance practice, says, first of all, that all ornaments begin on the beat. And secondly, that all trills should begin on the note above the main note. And there's a very sound reason for those two rules. That is, amongst other things, that's how the ornaments are represented in tables such as the Explikation that we've just seen. And obviously, it's very hard to argue with that. If Bach wrote it, then that's what Bach means. But the other school of thought, and one of its main proponents was the German scholar Friedrich Neumann, says that tables of this sort were mere outlines. They were very unnuanced, and they don't have the scope to deal with all the different circumstances and contexts in which ornaments are going to be found. And nor are they able to geographically represent positionings in relation to the beat. So they can only refer to a particular context. The way that Bach played an ornament, for example, when he was 20 years old is probably different from how he played it when he was 40 and from how he played it when he was 60. And whether he was thinking French, Italian or German styles at the time, because they were all different. So a one-size-fits-all theory is going to lead to all kinds of absurdities of parallel fifths and octaves, as well as strange rhythmic and melodic consequences that would be unthinkable in terms of Bach's style. And we can't possibly land that discussion here, so we won't even try. But if you're interested, you can read up on it for yourself. In any event, for this ornament that we were talking about now, this very first ornament, I'm going to tie over the F sharp in order to avoid repeating it. So precisely where the ornament begins is a little bit ambiguous. I'll do the same, in fact, in the three other similar places later on in the piece. Well, I see that we're running out of time and we're already only on the first ornament in the piece, so we'd better push on. The second one is a trill on the following beat, and whichever theory you subscribe to, that trill is going to start obviously on the B, and it's got a written out turn at the end of the bar, so the trill is going to integrate into that. Bar 2 starts with another accent, and then there's a couple of trills. The trill in bar 3, though, is probably another of those where you are going to have to decide where you stand on that discussion about ornaments. In this case, which note you're going to start the trill on. We're moving at that point down the scale, E, D, C, B, and then A with a trill on it, and then G. And if you start the trill on the B, in accordance with the convention, then you're going to be repeating the B from the previous note, or at the very least you're going to be tying it over, and so you lose the logic of the scale. To preserve the logic of the scale, you would have to start the trill on the A. But that, of course, means starting on the main note rather than from the note above. So it's your choice. You break one rule, whichever you do. Personally, I place more importance on the logic of the scale, and I start the trill on the A. But I'm very happy to accept that there are arguments both ways. Bar 4's got a couple of mordants and a falling accent. Bar 5 has a trill, which must start there on the upper note, incidentally, and then a so-called double cadence followed by a mordant. And you'll notice how all of these ornaments roll neatly into each other. And as we follow the piece through, there's basically a succession of mordants and trills, along with one falling accent. And in 2 cases, there are trills in the left hand as well. So there's no need at all to be confused or intimidated by these ornament signs, because they're all explained, every one of them, in Bach's table of ornaments there in the Explikation. And whichever interpretation you place on them, for example, whichever note you start the trill from, or whether you start the ornament before or on the beat, you will always have some experts who will be applauding you and saying, yes, that's exactly right. And you will have some other experts saying, what a complete muffin, nobody should do that at all. And you will never be able to please everybody, but you will always have somebody on your side. More to the point, though, is how to make them sound natural and spontaneous. You sometimes hear that you should learn a piece of music first without the ornaments and then put the ornaments in afterwards, and there are arguments for doing that. But at the same time, we've had another episode of this series on how to learn music. We looked at Vater unser im Himmelreich and decided that we should learn from the back. We should start with the very last chord and work gradually backwards, getting to the place that you can at all times. And another advantage of that, which I didn't mention then, is that with ornaments you can then learn the logic of the notes, the linear logic of the lines, and put the ornament in at that stage while you're still learning, and integrate the ornaments much better into the musical flow. So once again, if you start at the end, you will have a much better chance of getting the ornaments to sound natural and not contrived. So a final question, should you add extra ornaments or not? I think the answer is yes, but not in this particular instance. So it depends, again, going back to when we were talking about the various functions of ornaments, those kinds of ornaments that point out a structural event, like a trill before a cadence, those were automatic and expected. And if you haven't got a trill before a cadence, then there are often very good arguments for putting one in. In this particular instance, though, this piece, I think Bach has been so careful to notate all the ornaments he wants. They are very much integrated into the texture, and I think that there is no need at all to add extra ones. So what we're wanting as an end product is for the ornaments to sound natural, unforced, improvisational, spontaneous, but at the same time controlled. It's a wonderful piece, and I hope that you will enjoy it very much and really enjoy these ornaments.